All right, so today we're doing a deep dive on something I think a lot of people have probably heard of, but uh, maybe don't fully understand,
Yeah.
and that is tribalism.
Right.
Got a whole stack of research here
Yeah.
about it,
Yeah.
and um, you know, kind of the surprising thing is that it's not necessarily always a bad thing.
Yeah.
When we hear tribalism, we tend to think like, oh, my crazy uncle
Right. Right. Exactly.
on
Yeah.
Facebook or something.
Negatives.
Yeah, there are really negative connotations that come with that word.
Yeah.
But there are actually two different types of tribalism,
There are. Yes.
inclusive and exclusive tribalism. And so that's what we want to kind of tease apart a little bit today.
I think that's a great place to start because I think the distinction is really important.
Okay.
Because as you said, most people, when they think about tribalism, they just think about the negative aspects of it, you know?
Yeah.
And so this idea of exclusive tribalism is really what most people are familiar with. And so it's, it creates that kind of us versus them mentality. Right.
It really amplifies the differences between groups.
Yeah.
And it makes it difficult to even communicate or find common ground.
Yeah, you see this all the time, like in sports.
Oh, absolutely.
Or even politics, where
yeah.
it's like you're either on one side or the other.
Yeah, you're either with us or against us.
And there's no, like, nuance.
Right. There's no middle ground. It's very black and white.
Yeah, you're either, insert sports team fan or you're, the enemy.
Right, exactly. And there's no room for, like, appreciating both teams or,
right.
Even just like having a civil conversation with somebody who supports the other team.
Exactly. Yeah. And it just leads to so much division.
Absolutely.
And just like anger and, you can't even talk to people.
Yeah, it shuts down dialogue. It shuts down understanding.
Yeah. So that's exclusive tribalism.
That's exclusive tribalism.
Okay, so then what is inclusive tribalism?
So inclusive tribalism is actually a really interesting concept.
Yeah. And it kind of flips the script on what we traditionally think about when we hear tribalism.
Okay.
So instead of focusing on the differences and that oppositional kind of mentality,
right,
inclusive tribalism really emphasizes shared values and goals as the glue that binds people together. And so it's not about excluding others.
Right.
It's about finding that common ground.
Okay.
And recognizing that even though we might have differences on the surface, we can still come together and build something beautiful and meaningful.
So it's not about like pretending that everybody is the same.
No, not at all.
It's more about like focusing on the things that we share.
Exactly.
That bring us together.
It's about recognizing our shared humanity, I think, even though we might have different backgrounds, different beliefs.
Right.
We all ultimately want the same things,
Yeah, like to be happy and to feel connected.
Exactly.
And to have purpose.
Absolutely. And so inclusive tribalism kind of taps into that and says, okay, let's focus on those shared goals. Let's build bridges instead of walls.
Okay, so I'm starting to get a little bit of a picture of this, but can you give me like a concrete example?
Sure, yeah. So think about like a community garden, for instance.
Okay.
You might have people from all walks of life, different ages, different cultural backgrounds.
Different political beliefs.
Exactly. But they all come together because they share this common passion for gardening.
Right.
For growing food, for connecting with nature.
Yeah.
And so that shared goal allows them to overcome their differences.
Right.
And work together towards something that benefits everybody.
Okay, so that's like a real tangible example of inclusive tribalism.
Exactly. It's like a microcosm of what it could look like on a larger scale.
Okay, yeah, I like that. So that's helpful.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the two types of tribalism, inclusive and exclusive.
Right.
But how do we actually like make that shift?
Right.
From the exclusive, which is obviously the one that's causing a lot of problems in the world, to the inclusive kind. How do we actually make that happen?
Well, I think that's where street epistemology comes in.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
Because, this is something that we've talked about before on the show.
We have, yeah. It's a recurring theme.
So remind us again, for anybody who's new, what is street epistemology?
Sure. So street epistemology, or SE for short, is basically a method for having more productive conversations about beliefs.
Okay.
It's about asking questions to understand the reasoning behind someone's beliefs.
Okay.
Rather than, trying to win an argument or just dismissing them outright.
Right.
So it's really about fostering understanding and empathy.
Okay, so how does that tie into inclusive tribalism then?
Well, I think SE can be a really powerful tool for bridging divides between people who might otherwise be stuck in that exclusive tribalism mindset.
Okay.
If you think about it, a lot of those conflicts arise from a lack of understanding.
Right.
And so by using SE, we can start to break down those barriers.
Okay, so give me an example, like a hypothetical situation.
Sure. So let's say you have two people who have completely opposite viewpoints on climate change.
Okay, that's a pretty hot topic.
Yeah, it's definitely one that can get people fired up.
Yeah.
But instead of, just yelling at each other or agreeing to disagree,
Right.
they could use SE to actually try to understand where the other person is coming from.
Okay.
So, they might ask questions like, what led you to believe that climate change is or isn't real? Or what are your main concerns about this issue?
Yeah.
And through that process of asking and listening,
Yeah.
they might start to see that, hey, maybe we actually have some common ground here.
Right.
Maybe we both care about the environment. We just have different ideas about how to protect it.
Okay. Yeah, and just that understanding, I think,
Yeah.
can go a long way.
It can really humanize the other person.
Right, because I think a lot of times when we're in that
Yeah.
exclusive tribalism mindset, it's like we're dehumanizing the other.
Absolutely. We're seeing them as the enemy, as the other.
Right, as this like monolithic, evil entity or something.
Exactly. And so SE can help us to break down those stereotypes
Right.
and see the individual.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, too, that SE doesn't require you to, like, change your own mind
Exactly.
or to pretend to agree with someone else.
It's not about persuasion.
Right, it's more about just understanding.
Exactly. It's about having an open mind
Right.
and being willing to see things from a different perspective.
And I think, to your point about, like, not having to change your mind,
Yeah.
I think sometimes just understanding where the other person is coming from can be enough
Absolutely.
to kind of soften your stance a little bit.
Yeah, and I think there's also a lot of value in just being able to have a civil conversation with
Yeah.
someone who disagrees with you.
Exactly.
In today's world, it feels like that's becoming increasingly rare.
Yeah, that we're losing that ability.
We are, and so I think SE can help us to reclaim that.
So, okay, this is all really interesting, but I'm curious, like, do we have any examples from, like, the research that we've been looking at
We do actually.
where this has actually worked in real life?
There's a really fascinating case study that I came across
Okay.
about two people from opposing political parties
Okay.
who used SE to talk about a really contentious issue.
Okay, what was the issue?
I don't remember the specifics, but it was something that they had very strong disagreements about.
Okay.
But they agreed to try SE.
Yep.
And so they spent like an hour just asking each other questions,
Yeah.
trying to understand the reasoning behind each other's beliefs.
And what happened?
Well, it was really amazing. They didn't necessarily change each other's minds,
Okay.
but they both walked away with a newfound respect for the other person.
Okay.
And they both said that they felt like they had a better understanding of the issue.
That's really cool.
It is, right?
So even if you don't change somebody's mind, you can still have a positive impact.
Absolutely. And I think that's really encouraging because it shows that even in today's polarized world,
Right.
it's still possible to connect with people who see the world differently than we do.
Yeah. So it's not hopeless.
No, not at all.
Okay, good. I needed to hear that.
Yeah, I think we all do.
Okay, so we talked about inclusive and exclusive tribalism.
We have.
We've talked about how street epistemology can help to
Yeah.
bridge that divide. But, some people might say, well, why bother with tribalism at all?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Can't we just like all be individuals and kind of like,
Right.
do our own thing and not worry about like group dynamics?
Yeah, I think it's a tempting thought,
Yeah,
especially when you see all the negativity that can come from exclusive tribalism.
right.
But I think our sources actually make a really compelling argument against that.
Okay.
They point out that humans are social creatures by nature.
Okay.
We crave connection, we crave belonging. And trying to erase that completely is kind of like trying to deny a fundamental part of who we are.
Yeah, it's like saying, oh, we shouldn't breathe oxygen because,
Right.
It's bad for us in some way.
It's essential to our survival.
Yeah.
And so this need for connection, if it's not met in a healthy way, it's going to find an outlet somewhere.
Right. So it might come out in, some sort of unhealthy tribalism.
Exactly. It might even fuel the rise of more extreme ideologies or groups.
Right, because people are so desperate to belong.
Exactly. They're looking for that sense of community.
Yeah.
And if they can't find it in a positive way, they might be drawn to something that's ultimately harmful.
So it's almost like trying to force everybody to be completely independent
Yeah.
can actually backfire.
It can, and I think the research bears that out.
Okay, so then what's the solution?
Well, I think the key takeaway here is that instead of trying to erase tribalism altogether,
Okay.
we should focus on transforming it.
Okay.
How can we encourage inclusive tribalism where diversity is celebrated? Right.
And common goals unite people from different backgrounds.
Yeah. So rather than rejecting our tribal nature,
Yeah.
we should be trying to channel it in a positive direction.
Exactly.
Well,
Let's
yeah.
use it as a force for good.
Okay, I love that.
Yeah.
So that's something I'm definitely going to be thinking about.
Me too.
Like, how can I contribute to inclusive tribalism?
Yeah.
You know, both in my personal life and in the wider world.
Absolutely.
But this is just the beginning of our conversation.
Yeah, this is just scratching the surface.
In our next deep dive, we're going to explore how street epistemology can actually be a really powerful tool for fostering inclusive tribalism.
A natural fit.
Yeah, and we're also going to look at how some creators are actually exploiting the dynamics of exclusive tribalism.
The dark side.
For their own gain. So that's going to be a really interesting conversation. Stay tuned for that.
Can't wait.
All right.
See you next time.
See ya.